Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast, Stories from Here to Everywhere. We explore stories about community-based global learning from here to everywhere, connecting communities, classrooms, and cultures through the Community-Based Global Learning Collaborative. We're your hosts,
I'm Dennis McCunney.
and I'm Mac Benavides. So we've got kind of a baseline of what we're planning to do today. Going to be talking about community-driven learning and service. And as always, we like to allow for the conversation to just kind of unfold organically. So we'll just kind of be our authentic selves here. Before we get too far into it, Dennis, though, you just came back from a trip. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
I did, yeah, I did, Mac. Exciting partnership that we've been able to, through my university, East Carolina, been able to maintain for the past 5 years now in Westmoreland, Jamaica, Western Jamaica, Petersfield and Galloway, specifically the Petersfield Galloway Benevolent Society, PGBS, as they're called. So we've been working with them, my office and our honors college. And this year we worked with, partnered with UNC Wilmington, that has a very similar approach to community-based learning. And so we partnered together on this trip. So yeah, it's been a great partnership, especially after the Hurricane Melissa that came through, incredibly devastating storm that hit this particular community hard, this side of the island hard, and so really some good learning opportunities for our students, but also just some great needs for resources, support, all of that from both internal and external partners. Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the local efforts that were going on the ground in Jamaica that
Yeah,
were
yeah,
kind of starting to or looking to address some of those
yeah,
those needs?
yeah. Well, so, there are definitely some physical needs. I mean, I think I read a stat that something like 95% of homes in this community had roof damage or lost their roofs completely, right? So you see blue tarps all over the countryside. You see roofing tin, or as I call them, zinc, roofing materials just kind of wrapped around trees, still from the strength of the wind. So really, just incredibly, you see the strength of the storm, and how devastating it was. So a lot of rebuilding, in particular, our students, with limited construction skills, we were able to do some painting in the community center there, and also visited one of the early childhood schools, pre-K through second grade. So helping out with some supplies in the schools. Um, I think it's interesting too, thinking about our partnership with this community, because oftentimes, where we sit, right, Mac? I mean, we're thinking about, you know, could we get the students to sign up? Do we have the budget to support this? Do we have the time?
Mhm.
It's a significant amount of effort to launch a global learning program like this. But I remember one of our last nights there was talking with one of the host families, the host mom, who's an incredible person, amazing cook too, Mrs. Wright, and she said, we really appreciate you coming, and I said, I don't feel like we did that much, right? I mean, we did a little bit of painting. We made kind of a mess on the floor. We played around with the kids. We shared stories. We played games in the community center, but I didn't feel like we did that much. And she said, no. I mean, this visit is in partnership is so important to us, because the stipend that I get as a house mom, as a host,
Mhm.
for hosting students, I'm going to put a big chunk of those funds aside to buy roofing materials for my house, and this was a real boost for me. And I often don't think about that kind of not only just the learning and the cultural interaction, the immersion, but also just the real resources, economically, that are shared from a decision to run a program, right? And to run
Mhm.
these learning opportunities. So you see kind of the ripple effects when you hear these stories from community members who have kind of a different perspective on the value of these kinds of programs and these kind of encounters for students, right?
Yeah, it's kind of it's an interesting thought when we realize that the service, the direct service that we provide is only a small portion of the actual experience for the communities. There's honestly, I mean, painting a wall, right? Like someone in the community could easily do that.
Hmm.
And having volunteers there, can bring value in terms of the financial opportunity, but also, I just think about the sense of solidarity, knowing that
Hmm.
people even acknowledge that there's a need, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of, a lot of the work that I do is grounded in this concept of critical hope, right? This
Mm.
idea that we have
Hmm.
to have a really firm understanding of the past and how it's informed the present, and recognizing that that can oftentimes be really heavy, still
Hmm.
be oriented towards the possibilities of the future.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think that, you know, especially I was reminded in our program this month that, you know, speaking of critical hope, that people there with feeling the support from partners around the world, particularly, you know, university partners with whom they've worked, is feeling like they're not alone. They're not
Mhm.
alone in this disaster, and they're not alone in this rebuilding process because the sheer size of it can be really overwhelming, right? When
Mhm.
it takes, 6 months to get new roofing materials, right? And you're paying $5,000 just in customs, right? To
Mhm.
bring stuff from China to Kingston, Jamaica. I mean,
Yeah.
that's and get it through the port. I mean, that can be overwhelming, especially when there are limited resources coming from the government for rebuilding and help, like maybe a few $1,000 for relief. So I think
Yeah.
sometimes we need to be reminded of that, the value of solidarity and what that actually looks like in the real life experiences, the day-to-day experiences of individuals and communities, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, how did y'all come about the decision on like what kinds of projects that you would do? You mentioned limited experience with construction. How is the community driving the service or driving the student learning that was going on in that trip?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this community center has a long history of hosting university visitors, and
Mhm.
so they call it their village tourism program, and they've learned a lot along the way, right? I mean, they've learned um, what it means to kind of provide a meaningful educational experience, but also one that gives students kind of a flavor of the area, right?
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we need to remind our partners there too that we're not there to be entertained, right? We're there to learn. We're there to be with you, but not there to be entertained. And I think that's an important message, right? And we try to say that with our students, but or to our students a lot, but sometimes it is harder to absorb by our community partners because they just want to make sure the students, have a
Yeah.
great experience and want to come back, which I really appreciate and commend. But as far as the decisions to what needed to be done. Yeah, I think it was a combination of knowing what the resources were and what the paint budget looked like, but also being able to hire a local painter with some of those funds to provide some of the expertise, but also knowing that a small gesture like painting the center, the roof had completely blown off during the
Yeah.
storm, right? So that was the first priority. But then after that, the smaller repairs and painting, the center in these amazing, like, Caribbean colors
Yeah.
that, we often don't get here in the States. Um, was something that they knew the students could do. It was something that was also kind of a community building experience with this for the students, and they could work alongside community members and staff at the center. So kind of a perfect activity that had a real tangible benefit. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
you know, it likely, cleaning up the mess left behind from a storm and painting can easily bring the life back into that community space. So,
Yeah, yeah,
I can definitely see where that might have felt or that might have been an important project for the community center.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. How about you, Mac? What kinds of things you have going on lately?
Yeah. So I've got a trip to Guatemala coming up here at the end of the month. Planning to do some work with community partners down there. Um, Particularly looking at some research around how perceptions of agency between community organizations and community residents impact the way that we do co-creation work together.
Hmm.
So really excited for that trip. I think that there's a lot of interesting questions that come up around this idea of agency and co-creation, right? Like if I think that the people on the ground are change agents, are capable of bringing about the change that they hope to see, then I think about my role differently as a foreign volunteer.
Mm. Hmm.
Whereas if I think that they have no agency, then I'm likely going to come into the community more from a savior mentality.
Hmm.
It makes me think about this story of this lady who had come to work with one of my partners down in Guatemala, and she knew that there was concerns around malnutrition, especially with children. And so what she decided to do was she bought, I want to say like a ton of onions, and decided to gift these to a couple of organizations in the town. And they just looked at her like how like it is impossible for us to use all of this produce before it goes bad.
Hmm.
Um, no consultation with the community went into this.
Wow.
But thank you. Because there always has to be that thank you. You mentioned that entertainment piece, right? We want to make sure
Yeah.
that you come back. And so, and ultimately the sad reality is most of that produce ended up going to waste. And so,
Mm. Yeah.
that was one of the first conversations, one of the first stories that I learned about from my partners in Guatemala. And it was a really big eye-opening conversation for me. And I think, part of this is around like how we communicate with one another. So
Hmm.
uh, Latin America oftentimes comes from more of an indirect communication style. And so we'll tell stories that are intended to help us see like what's important. Or like you're supposed to read between the lines to find what's the
Mm.
important message here. And so
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that stuck out to me was that need for that co-creation, right? So anytime that I'm doing a trip to this community, bringing students or just myself and making sure that the learning and the work that's going to be done is determined by the
Mm.
community or at least
Hmm.
in partnership with the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that I'm not bringing in, you know, a ton of onions.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I love that metaphor. That sounds like a good topic for a presentation or a paper. Let's
Yeah,
not bring in a ton of onions, right?
right.
Um, yeah. Well, it also kind of the way you're talking about it too reminds me of actually a particular kind of like behavioral therapy, right? Where in
Hmm.
order to change your mental framework or your perception or the way you think about things broadly, you need to act that way first, right? And then the framework comes next, or the perception. So it's
Hmm.
one thing, to help your students, right, um, to read a particular theory and to
Hmm.
understand, community-based theory. But it's another thing to actually practice it and see then how that impacts their behavior, right? Does that make sense? Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
it also it brings up kind of what you were mentioning earlier, eh, the unfortunate reality is that I would say probably most programs are not coming in with the values or the philosophy of the collaborative, for example,
Yeah.
and this idea of fair trade learning, right? We still have a
Hmm.
lot of programs that are predominantly looking at global service as a form of saving or pri primarily centering student learning or student benefits without really considering the community needs.
Hmm.
And so, you know, we we have to recognize that our community partners, that's what they're used to as well.
Yeah.
And so even when we tell them, hey, we're not here to be entertained, that is not what they're used to. And
Right.
so
Right.
some of the conversations I've had
Hmm.
with my community partners is to say like, what mutual responsibility do we have? So what responsibility do you have as hosts to not just be recipients but also be contributors to the program? And then what responsibilities do we have as visitors? Again, not just to contribute, but also to receive
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
learn. And so, but framing that mutual responsibility, not just the mutual benefit, has been a really important part of this conversation around how do we make sure that the community is the driving force for what happens in the partnership.
Right. Right. Yeah. Mutual responsibility, mutual benefit. Yeah. Two sides of the same coin. Right. Yeah. Because, we can talk about reciprocity and mutuality all day long, but the actual perception of it, the actual practice of it is a whole different
Mhm.
matter. I was thinking about a conversation I had with a study abroad provider representative who was leading a program for my 11th grade
Mhm.
son, and I asked about community-based immersion experiences as part of the program, and the person said, "We're just getting into the service learning market, our company."
Yeah.
And it made me scratch my head a little bit. Service learning market, okay. It was like, what does that actually mean, right? Sure, it's there's a market for all these programs, but we know that the actual practice of relationship is much more complex and rich, and
Mhm.
and can't just be decided by a program director, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. Good stuff. Lots to think about there and to kind of chew on, and really hope your trip goes well and it's productive, and you come back with some good stories for us
Yeah. Oh,
from
speaking of
there
coming
to
back with
here.
stories, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Do you want to share what's going to be coming up for our listeners?
Yeah, so we will have a mini episode from the field, and we'll be hosting that soon. We'll also be, down the road at the IARSLCE conference in New Orleans in October, doing some podcasting from there and also presenting there too. So we hope to connect with some listeners there as well as conference attendees. So stay tuned on that. If you have suggestions for us, please don't be shy and let us know. We are open to your ideas and want to hear from you. Yeah, yeah. Well, great. Well, thanks, Mac, for the good conversation. That's it for this episode. We hope you make sure that you click subscribe to keep up to date on all things community-based global learning. We also invite you to check out the Collaborative's website. It's cbglcollab.org, cbglcollab.org, to access resources and toolkits, read the newest blog posts, and learn more about fair trade learning. And then from the website, you can join the Collaborative's mailing list to receive news and updates. You can also stay connected by following the Collaborative on all sorts of social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Slack as well. So look for the links in the description below. And if you want to have something to share in our podcast or on the CBGL blog, you can nominate yourself or others to share about your work and experiences that are empirically grounded, inform practice, and demonstrate application of the principles that we share. So, as always, from here to everywhere, we thank you for tuning in. Take care.